Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 18 of Josh Says Mean Things. I'm your host, Josh Baker, here to say mean things about your photos. Not really mean. You know how we do it. Constructive criticism, something like that. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's been a it's been a month since we last chatted with everybody. Um, yeah, yeah, it's been a month. A whole lot has gone on, right? We've had a big freeze. People are starting to get shots in the arm. I'm very excited. We get to have all adults get to start getting vaccinated in Texas starting next week. I'm very excited for that. I had an idea today. At some point, when we can all see each other in real life, in the real world. What's up, Miguel? That it would be fun to do a live stream with an audience. So like happy hour, but we'll run the live stream from the happy hour. What do y'all think about that? What's up, Bron? Ronnie D. Ronnie D sounds like that's your rapper name, right? Like Beastie Boys and me, Ronnie D. Anyway, let me know what y'all think about that. I don't know. I think I can do it. I got to find a place that has good enough internet connection. But I think that would be fun. I'm kind of tired of doing just me talking into a void. I've done so many of those in the last year, either through Precision or through other photo clubs or through our photo club or through Josh's Mean Things or whatever else. And so that's my idea. I don't know when, maybe what month are we in? March, April, maybe May, once everybody starts getting vaccinated. Would y'all be down for like a Josh Says Mean Things happy hour audience live stream? Would that be wild? Would that be fun? I'll have to figure it out, but it'll be somewhere in Pflugerville because, represent North Side. I'm North Side Pflugerville. North Side. Kendra says she's in. That's what I'm talking about. Omar says let's do it at my house. Yeah, we are not doing it at my house. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old in the room with me right now. They have their headphones on so they can't hear me. So I don't think my house. But somewhere, I don't know, somewhere we can grab a beer, talk photos, man. Have a little like happy hour, social hour before, and then let's do it, right? We'll do it. We'll have a crowd cam. We can have like a regular cam. I got the cams. I'm not worried about having cameras. You have a theater, Omar? That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm very hyper today. I don't know if y'all know, I was in my last 9 days were kind of insane. I took a family trip. We drove 2 days up to New Mexico with my kids and my wife. Some friends of ours had a cabin. We went snow skiing for 3 days. Took 2 days to drive back. Got home Thursday night like at 7 p.m. Left on a plane Friday morning to fly to Miami. Shot for like 10 hours Friday. Then shot a wedding all day Saturday. Then got on a plane Sunday and came back. And I've been feeling out of it, man. The last 48 hours, I've just been like la la land. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. And about 2 hours ago, I could finally like have a thought. It was amazing. Anyway, all that to say is I'm very hyper now because I finally feel like I'm human again. Because for the last few days, I have not felt like a human because it was travel, backup. I was having nightmares about photo backup. Ooh, yeah. So I was really paranoid about all that. Anyway, let's talk photos. So what's the theme of today? So I never know what the theme is until everybody submits their photos. Today's theme, we're going to talk mainly about two things: shadows and composition. Okay, shadows and composition. That's going to be the main theme for today. I think this is my thesis. Your skill as a photographer is how well you can control your shadows and what you do with your shadows. When I was starting out, I used to think so much of it was about the highlights, about the bright parts of the photo, and that certainly matters. But I think my skill, as it's gotten better, is what I do with my shadows and how I play with them. And so we'll be talking about that a lot with different photos. There's no consistency. I wish there was, in terms of what I want. It's like pepper, right? So if y'all have read some of our Patreon blog posts, I talk a lot about salt and pepper, right? Salt for our highlights, pepper for our shadows, and how, right, season to taste. I just made a meal and I like a certain amount of seasoning. My kids like a little bit different seasoning, right? Everybody's got their own flavor profile. And so learning how to season your dishes, right? How to cook your photos in such a way that they taste right to the viewers, right? That's kind of the whole challenge. And shadows are such a key component, but I think we see highlights and bright parts first. And so that's the thing we focus on. But I think if we focus on how we control our shadows, that it's going to make those bright parts taste better. I don't know if that makes sense. What's up, Austin? All the way from New Braunfels, Texas. There's only one S in New Braunfels. All right, let's go through some photos. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right. Oh, come. There we go. So this first one is from Miss Rachel. Actually, the first two photos are from Rachel. She decided to send me like 10 photos, but I really liked them. I wanted to talk about them, and they were very different. So I thought they'd be a good thing. I think when we're talking about food photos or drink photos, what's up, Chris? You're coming up, Chris. I saw your Snake River stuff. We're coming up. I think when we're talking food photography, I think the easiest way to judge them is by our stomachs, right? By our tongues. Like, does your mouth water when you see that dish? And I saw this photo with the topo and lime, and like I'm looking at it now, and my mouth's watering. Right? I'm like, man, I'd go for a topo right now. Also, do you know that Topo's making hard seltzers? Do you know that they're coming out with alcoholic topos? They're coming soon. I know, crazy, right? Crazy. Anyway, I would go for a topo seltzer right now. So I think this photo does its job. Okay, let's get that out of the way. It does its job. It makes me want to drink a topo. I love how crisp the labeling looks. I like the water on the bottles. I like the limes as an accent. All those things, great. Well done, Rachel. If I had to say some mean things about it, I know, title of the show. The whites that start on the left, well, my left, the photo's left, are very bright on one side, and then they kind of fade to gray. And on that right-hand side of the photo, they get a little muddled. So maybe a gradient tool on Lightroom with a little bit of exposure and a little bit of whites to kind of bring up those white sides on maybe the right right third of the photo. It just gets a little gray and a little dirty on that side. And I think with something this bright and poppy, to have that white all the way through, you can see that the bottle on the far right is a little bit darker than the one on the left. And so just bring that gradient tool over just a little bit, just to make them all kind of even. I will say also that it's a good rule of odds that we have 3 bottles of topo, right? 1, 2, 3. Threes are interesting. If this was 2 bottles, not so interesting. If it's 4 bottles, not as interesting. 3 bottles, right choice. But yeah, I love how like the labels are just popped off and ready to go. So good job. I like it. But yeah, just bring up the whites on the right side. That's my only complaint. That's my only mean thing. All right, let's see if we can advance this slideshow. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Are y'all seeing that? Yeah. So then Rachel also sent me this one, like immediately after. She said, this is a picture of her husband. And I must say, good looking husband. Good job, Rachel. That's a good looking dude there. Yeah, that may be a little awkward, but I can appreciate handsome guys. So a couple things here. She sent me a couple other ones. And she has some hand issues. So I picked this one because it has hands in them. And I just kind of like how he's like bundled up. She said that she's always hot and he's always cold, so he's always bundled up. But I like the layering. I like the texturing. I like that we can feel the texture of the clothes, right? That the scarf has a different texture than the jacket, than the shirt, than the hoodie, right? So they're all different textures, and that's kind of fun to play with. And they're all in that same palette, but not the same color. So there's some like real subtle stuff going on there. Now, what would I do different? This is a 3x2 crop, right? So just native digital resolution. I think this one would actually be better served as an 8x10. If you look at how much room is by his knee and how much room of the frame is by his shoulder, not very much. But then below the hands and then above the head, a lot of room, right? So it's not symmetrical of how much room is on the horizontal axis as it is on the vertical. So I think an 8x10 crop would solve that problem almost immediately. It would bring a crop just above the head, just below the hands, and then it would be kind of even along with the knee and the shoulder. Okay. But also, let's talk shadows, right? I think this is a 2-light setup or a light with a reflector, right? We have a light hitting the side of his face, and then the darker side, it's either another light or a reflector in close. Rachel, if you're listening, let us know which, but those are my two guesses. I only see one catch light in his eye, so that's why my guess is that there is a reflector. So, but yeah, if you see that, like, even his far shoulder, not the lit shoulder, but the far shoulder, it's not black, right? It's darker, but it's not all the way there. So she controlled her shadows, right? Even his darker cheek, there's still a lot of information there. It's not all the way gone. And so I think this is good. If it was me, I probably would have boosted maybe the clarity a little bit, or at least added up maybe some texture to his jacket, right? With the brush tool, we could have brushed in some texture, and maybe a little bit of vignette just to bring that gray above his shoulders a little bit brighter. And it's kind of competing with the face some. And so in Lightroom, you could do a radial vignette on his face and then darken everything around that. Keep the face exposure the same and kind of bring down the highlights around his face just so that we know exactly where to go. We should be looking at his eyes and his face and not the gray above his shoulder. So just something just to tone that down just a little bit, I think would take this to that next level. So good photos, Rachel. Those are two really good submissions. All right. This next one is from Mr. Austin. Austin said this is a senior photo. I'm guessing this is a college senior because this is Texas State in San Marcos. I have done a senior photo in almost the exact same spot. And sometimes if you go there, there is a line to get a photo at this really cool arch. So a couple things with this. One, I really like the framing, right? We have this really cool arch. It's very symmetrical. The person's right at the apex. All very good. Also, good job of keeping the hat and the foot in the frame and not being like edged out, right? So that's a good thing. I love her expression, right? She's very, very gleeful to be done with college. I know that I was very done to be with college too. So all of those things, very well done. I will say this angle, be careful with this angle, right? We're low shooting into somebody wearing a short dress or romper. Just be careful there. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you did it wrong. I'm just saying be careful. Also, if you look at her back elbow, it's like hyperextended, which not a big deal, but its placement makes you think it might be something other than an elbow. So again, just little things to just watch out for, right? Body parts. But I do love the leg kick. Now, if this was me, what would I do? Well, we're shooting in open shade here, right? But the area behind open shade is open sun. And that contrast is a lot. And cameras just don't handle that very well, right? The best cameras on the market see something like 14 stops of dynamic range, somewhere in there. Our human eye sees like 22. And so dealing with that super bright background with open shade foreground is always a struggle, right? It's why people edit photos. It's why people bring lighting. That is a huge part of any photographer's problems. So if it was me, I would be packing a lot of lights with me, and I would expose for the background to come down. And then for my subject, I would bring a light to bring them back up. And that does a couple things. One, actually, her thigh, her right leg, the leg closest to us, is brighter than her face. Again, just a negative gradient on her legs, just a little bit, or a brush tool or something on her face, just to make that come out a little bit more. But if we had a light above her, her face would automatically be the brightest thing, and then the light would fall down to her legs. And so, again, this is if it was me. I would be carrying a lot of lights with me, at least one big, Godox 400 or 600 with a softbox, so that it hits her, and I could then control that background, and I could bring it down and underexpose it. Yeah, I know. I've had to shoot this one natural too. I know exactly where he took this from. There's also a lot of walking involved, so carrying lights is a pain in the butt, quite literally. Like, it's a very hilly area, and it's not easy to get to. And so it's tough. And what I hate about places like this is that it's such a good photo location that there's a lot of photographers there. And I hate having people waiting on me. And so like when I've gone and shot here in the past, like there's literally people like tapping their hands like, come on, dude, hurry up, get your lights set up. And so I hate that feeling of like people watching me. I don't know. It's also why I don't like being on a golf course with people behind me. I don't play good when people are watching. So you're laying on the ground. Yeah, I thought you had to get low. What focal length are you shooting at? 50 or longer? Longer, I'm guessing. Maybe 50. So yeah, again, good composition, good all that. But just that next level for me would be adding a light to control that background or wait for a different time. This photo at night could look very interesting. The only thing at night though is you're gonna have some weird like fluorescent lights in the background and all that. But just ideas, just things you could do, things you could try. 50, yeah. Very cool. Anyway, it's a good shot. I really like her emotion. I really like that she's smiling and just done with it because I know that feeling exactly. So good job, Austin. All right. This is from Miss Laura. And we have 2 flower photos. Let me preface this by saying flower photos are hard. Okay. They're hard in the sense that, and y'all probably heard me talk about this, but how do you make them yours? How do you take flower photos and make them explicitly you as the author of that flower? Same with landscapes, right? So landscapes have that same problem too, right? How do I take a landscape photo and make it mine? For me, I wait till the sun goes down and then I light paint it or do star trails or something like that. And that gives me an advantage there. For flowers, what I've done in the past is, we've done Lady Bird Johnson photo walks and I brought a bunch of strobes with me, right? How does Josh solve problems? He brings a bunch of lights with him. I know it's not a very efficient solution, but it's what I got. So I think this one, I think 2 flowers, right? We talked about the rule of odds earlier. And this one kind of suffers from a 2, right? It's not an odd, it's a 2. So how would I do this one differently? Here's what I would do. I would crop it way in so that we only saw half of each photo. Does that make sense? So I'd cut out the right half of the right photo, the left half of the left photo. And that way we have 2 photos, but each half makes a whole. So now even though we have 2 subjects, we actually have 1. So now we're back to a good rule of odds. And so that's how I would make this one. Also, it seems, I don't know if it's not bright enough, but then I look at like the center of the flower. What's the word for that? Stamen, something like that. And it's actually white. And so brightening it up, you're going to overexpose that. And so maybe boosting the shadows. I'm not sure. It overall feels a little bit underexposed. But composition wise, I would crop in a whole bunch. Maybe a vertical, I don't know. But to get to where we have half and half of one of the 2. Okay. Just trying different things to make it mine and not somebody else's photo that they could take of these same flowers. Okay. But it also forces you to get really close, right? The beauty of flowers is in the details. And this one, there's eyelashes. Oh, I just realized they're eyelashes. Haha. They're fake eyelashes. Okay. I get it now. I didn't get that the first time I saw this photo. Okay. Well, I think my initial is still there. I think it would still be interesting half and half. But now it's a much more interesting photo than I first gave it credit for. What do y'all think? What do y'all think of this flower photo? What do we think? Throw it out in the comments because now I'm not sure. But it does feel a little bit underexposed. That'd be my biggest complaint. Composition would be second. But it's funny that there's fake eyelashes in there now. All right, Laura, I see what you did. You stumped me a little bit. Now I'm going to have to go back and rethink about it. I'll send you a private message with what I think fully because you stumped me a little bit. Now, I'm guessing that's lipstick. Okay, beauty and nature. I get what you were telling me now. So Laura said she did this for her college, I guess, photo assignment. I'm not sure exactly what. But now I get that this is lipstick inside a flower. Okay. Again, I would get closer. That top tip of the flower petal is just breaking our frame. So either get much closer or just a slight tip back, right? Just a slight tip back. Chris, yeah, you'd like to see that cropping. Yeah, I think so too. So either just back up just a touch so that the top of that flower isn't touching the edge of the frame, or come in really close to really center on what we're supposed to be looking at. I get that this is lipstick now. I was looking at this earlier and going, I don't see. I told you I wasn't a human earlier today. See, it's just how I am sometimes. But I get it now. Now that I'm fully human again, I see what's going on here. Beauty in nature. All right, that's funny. And she painted the flower with some of the lipstick. Okay. It makes a lot more sense now. So I will retract my first statements and say, good job on making this your own photo. Good job on making this your own and doing something different, right? By manipulating the photo, by adding that human element. You took it in a new direction that I wasn't anticipating and that I didn't appreciate 3 hours ago. So good job, Laura. Yeah. Allergies. Zyrtec. Woo. All right. This one is from Miss Mary. Miss Mary actually shot the wedding with me in Miami. We met in Nashville at the PPA National Conference last year. Mary's also our newest patron, so thanks, Mary. Appreciate that. If y'all are subscribers to our Patreon page, you just saw photos of Mary, and she didn't move, but we changed the lights, so that was kind of fun. And this is, I'm guessing, New York skyline. I'm not exactly sure what skyline this is. But this is one of the photos that made me think, hey, shadows, right? This is what we need to talk about. And I think the highlights here are controlled, but there's just a lot of in the shadow. And so maybe I'm missing something here, but it just seems over dark. It seems kind of past the moment. And so boosting shadows, boosting blacks, just so we can get a little bit of detail, but maybe like killing highlights, killing whites just a little bit so that we don't overload our bright channels, could go a little bit way to kind of give the viewer a little bit more sense of what's going on here. So, yeah, that'd be my big suggestion there. Cool. All right, this one comes from Miguel, another one of his fabulous travel photos. I think this photo is funny because normally on a street, when we see somebody doing that like double take, it's usually a guy looking at a girl doing the double take, right? There's that whole meme going around of like the guy like whistling, looking back over his shoulder, right? But what's funny here is that it's a woman looking at a car, and it's just, oh man, it's just not what you would expect. And so I think that's funny. And then one girl with the headphones, she just doesn't care at all. But this one girl's like, man, that's a cool car. She's kind of, checking it out. Now, what I would change about this, right? What would I do? I think if it was a foot lower, I think this is a little bit more interesting photo. Because I'd like to see the wheel of that car fully there. The sky doesn't really add much. And I don't know that the people in the background really add much either. And so dropping the photo just a little bit and then turning just a little bit or cropping so that it's just background color, two people, car. In this case, I don't think the people in the back, even though one's taking a cell phone shot, I don't really think that adds to the overall story. The story is definitely, this double take of the car. I do love the colors. I like the toning. I like that there is detail that we can kind of see into all the different areas of the scene. And it gives our eyes a lot of places to go explore. And so I'm guessing it's from Cuba. I'm guessing. I could be wrong. But knowing Miguel went there a few years ago, that's my guess. But like we have this purple and orange door, right? We have a white car, blue, right? We just have all these colors going on. But they're not like over the top, like oversaturated. They're just kind of there. So yeah, and it's a cool car, right? It's an old like box, Ford. So it's kind of a fun car, fun scene, fun moment. So good job, Miguel. All right, this one comes from Miss Jessica Jade. Jessica just got after shooting with my R6, she decided to get an R6 of her own. So she told me that she just went to this arcade and like just found people to model, like went up to people and just asked, which I don't know if you've ever done that. It's really fun to do, but man, it's kind of nerve wracking as well. So good job. Just like having an idea and going for it, and like going up to random people you've never met before and just being like, hey, let me take your photo. Right. And having that level of confidence, like it's tough. I sat on 6th Street, like at lunch break one time and just asked like, hey, let me take your photo. What are you doing this for? For me. And like people are very leery about it. So there's a lot of obstacles to overcome before you even take the photo. We'll talk about that later when Stevens come up. What obstacles are you willing to overcome to get your vision? So let me first start off and say, hey, I know that it's hard to go up to random people and just ask to like, let me take your photo, right? Especially me. I'm an old white dude, right? Hey, let me take your photo. Yeah, right. Jess is, a female, so it's a little bit easier, I guess, a little bit easier. Anyway, so her question was, there's reflections in the glasses, didn't really like that. And she's like, man, if I had to add a light or if I had to add something better, like what would I add? And that kind of stumped me a little bit. One, if it was me, I think this would be a great place for like 2 speed lights that were gelled. And let me talk about motivated lighting. Do y'all know what I mean if I say motivated lighting? Does that make sense as a term, motivated lighting? What it means is it's another way you could say it would be like organic lighting. So in an arcade like this, right, we have a lot of those like neon blue, neon red, neon purple. And so we would want to try to pull some of those colors into our gelled lights as a way to add interest, right? So we might have a light coming from one side that was nice and red. We might have it coming from through. So the first thing I would say is expose for that purple light in front of you and get that exposure right first. I tried to pull it back and it was gone. I don't have the raw file, but I tried getting it back and it's just overgone. So getting that exposure first where it's purple and then letting everything else just kind of fall where it goes. I would put a light, if I could, shoot through that vending toy machine and onto her face. And then as an edge light, pick up an opposite color, maybe a blue or red, like the arcade behind her, to give her some separation off from the background. Now, as far as reflection and glasses go, you could try a polarizer. The problem with a polarizer in a situation like this, you're already working with such low light levels that a polarizer is going to kill another stop or so of light. And so then you're really going to be pushing your exposure pretty hard. And so I don't know if that would be, I would just live with the reflections in this case. Now, if it was a corporate headshot where we had time, yeah, polarizer or, just positioning the lights to where they weren't in the reflection, that'd be fine too. But for something like this where you're just kind of like in the moment, I actually kind of dig the reflections because it lets you know that it's a real photo. So I went through, she asked me to do an edit as well. And so I'll show you what I did. I did do a little bit of a 8x10 crop. In this case, now, this is weird. I boosted the shadows a whole lot just because I wanted to see the arcade behind us, right? I want to see all the colors. And I just let that purple stripe in front go. I tried to bring it back, but there's nothing to do. And so I still wanted to keep her as bright as I could. And I tried to match her exposure to be at almost to the same brightness values as the brightest thing, which is that purple strip in the center. But I also think it brings in a lot more color by boosting the shadows. I killed the highlights, I killed the whites, I boosted the blacks, and then I put a radial filter on her so that just her like torso and face were brighter. And then I went to my luminance channels. Her hair I wanted to keep green, so I dropped that aquamarine color in luminance. And then I boosted her skin tone up in luminance. Yeah. So it took me maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but I like that I could see more detail in the arcades. I like that her hair kind of stayed there. And then I smoothed out her skin, not by doing any editing, but just by brightening the color of her skin, made it look smoother. Okay. So I'll show you hers, which cool, very, very contrasty. But for this case, I just wanted to see more detail. So I boosted shadows, boosted blacks, killed highlights, killed whites, radial filter just on her. Okay. And then I did an 8x10 crop instead of a 3x2, so I could focus a little bit more on the random stranger here. So just brought more color into it that way as well. So, yeah. But yeah, lights could be cool here too. Something like this would also be really cool for like a long exposure, like maybe fifth or tenth of a second, and use those lights in the background as kind of a twirly whirl. And then with two speed lights, you could freeze her. That would be an option as well, right? Something to try. All right, this is from Mr. Omar. Omar's coming. I don't know if you've ever seen The Wire. Great show. Highly recommend it. Not PG. But yeah, Omar sent me these. He's like, hey man, what do you think? And this was my favorite one. I like the pose. I generally don't like squatting photos. It's just me. Just don't like them generally. But I like this one. I like the way her arms are. And I like that her body is twisted from her face, right? Her body's already told Omar this. But I think the shadows overall are actually too boosted, right? I think the shadow levels are too high. And her face value is so close to all the stuff in the background that it's kind of hard to pick her out. It makes the background busier than it really is because the shadow levels are higher. There's no contrast. And it's a very contrasty photo, right? If we look at the top of her arm to the bottom of her arm, right, it goes from white to black. If we look at like one side of the face, right? So there are shadows in the scene. There is kind of a lot of inherent contrast. But I think it has too much shadow and it makes it look a little unnatural. So he sent me the raw, so I did an edit as well. One of the things that also, I think I've talked about this probably every episode, but I don't like things not straight if they're supposed to be. So the table, look at the bars on the table. I fixed those so that they're vertical because my brain just works that way. And I don't know if it makes it better, but it satiates some of my compulsions. So how about that? All right, so this is what I did. She had some hair blowing through her face, and Omar cleaned it out, and so did I. But the original did have some like hair in the face. But what I think this edit does is that it makes the face the brightest part of the photo, whereas here in the original edit, there's a lot of pixels competing for the same brightness. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So I made everything darker but her face, so that her face stood out, so that I could tell you visually where to look. I want you to look at her face first. Yeah, I did boost her eyes a little bit. I added some posts just so she has brown eyes, just to bring them out. They were a little dark. That's nothing to do with the photographer. That's just how cameras work. It makes brown eyes. So I boosted those a little bit, boosted the whites a little bit in the eyes. Added a vignette around her face so that everything was darker aside from her. And then I did some color grading. If y'all like this color grade, I'll throw it out in the next post. I'll save it out and y'all can play with it if you want because it's some interesting color grading as well. I also dropped the reds and yellows to keep her shirt and jacket down low and boosted the brightness of her face to make her face pop. But if you look at the right side of her face, this actually goes to black in my edit, which normally I would say boost the shadows. But in this case, I think by it going to black and make it offsets her skin tone better. By having that white-black contrast right next to each other, her face and the blackness of the hair, it makes her face pop. Whereas in the original edit, the face and the hair were too close in exposure, and so her face doesn't pop off. You kind of go to her eyes, and then you kind of go to her hair, and then you kind of go to her shirt, right? Just right there. But by not boosting the shadows and adding contrast, adding a little dehaze, it allowed the face to pop off against the darkness. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I fixed the verticalness of the bench because I can't not do that. All right. So, but good job, Omar. Keep shooting, man. You did a lot right here. One of the other things, Omar, I think I told you in my text too, though, is that, good job communicating with your models, right? Good job of talking to them and getting an idea of kind of what you want. So keep that up because I think that's such an important part of everything is having that communication. That's actually maybe the most important thing you can do is have great communication. So, all right. Mr. Steven and his, what some said couldn't be done photo. So let me tell y'all that this was done essentially in camera. Steven, I think you said it was what, 10 photos? 10 photos stacked? So Steven was using a star tracker. So for the sky, the camera was tracking the exposure of the stars, so that the stars didn't have motion in them. And so that's actually the Milky Way rising above the 360 bridge. And this is actually, he actually captured the Milky Way from this point. This is not a composite in the sense of it's not a sky from Yellowstone. This is the stars that you can see if you could hold your eyes open for 2 minutes. Right, because I think he told me it was 10 2-minute exposures. Am I getting that right, Stephen? 10 2-minute exposures to get the Milky Way. And then he blended them in Sequator, which is a really cool piece of software that allows you to do some star stacking and some other things. You can also do star trails with it. It's actually my preferred star trail photo blender now. I used to use star stacks. Now I prefer Sequator. Okay. So this is really cool, right? We have really cool exposures of the cars. We have a Milky Way. It looks great. There's also details into the shadows and all that. You can actually see the skyline a little bit in the far back left corner. So there's a lot going on here, right? Very cool. Here are some things to consider potential next time you do it when you have a filter that kills some of the light pollution. A base exposure of the foreground where it doesn't overload the traffic lights, right? So I like the streaks of light on the bridge, but they kind of go over. So an underexposed bridge, or maybe a stepped version of the foreground to combine, where you could get more detail in the foreground. So having like an ISO 100. What's up, Mark? Mark, where in the world are you, man? I know you're traveling and doing all your stuff with your wife somewhere out in the world. I never know where y'all are. But I think by doing a couple different exposure values of the foreground, blending those, so that the car traffic doesn't overload that brightness. Because what happens is the Milky Way is kind of wants to be the star of the show, but the brightness of the headlamps of the car kind of overwhelms that diagonal. And so having some different foreground exposures to play with or blend, I think would help. And also like under the bridge, that tree gets a little crispy down there. So just having a couple there to play with, I think would be cool. But I'm freaking amazed that you got this, man. Like I was cheering for you and I was rooting for you, but I really didn't know if it was going to be, I didn't know if you could see it. I didn't know no matter how long you expose, would it come out? Like, I just didn't know if it was, I thought there's too much light pollution to see it at all. And so I'm really impressed that, that it came out like at all. Like, that's amazing. So we'll talk more about next time. If I'm not out of town, I'll go up there with you and we'll try some stuff. Savannah. Yeah. Savannah, Georgia. A lot of film production. Mark does a lot of film production stuff. So very cool. How long? And then Steven, if you can tell everybody how long in post did this photo take you to put together in post? I'm kind of curious that as well. But yeah, really cool. I think, Steven started telling me about this photo in his mind like 3 or 4 weeks before he actually did it. So having that vision in your head of what you want to do, and then getting the pieces in place so that you can go out and execute it, like that to me is the difference between 5 hours in post. Yeah, I don't doubt it. I think that's the difference between making a photo and taking a photo. And a lot of what I try to do personally is to make photos. I want to put everything into the scene that I want and nothing that I don't. And I need to make sure I have all the talent in place or the gear in place to make my photos, so that I'm not just taking photos. I actually have a hard time when I should be just taking photos to just take them, because I always want to add more. And I have a hard time of staying minimal. I kind of go maximal too much. So I don't know, but yeah, really good job, Steven. I really like the grit that it took to get this photo. So yeah, excellent. All right, this one's from Mr. Brian. Um, so again, I think this photo is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about shadows and brightness, salt and pepper, right? That kind of thinking of, not just the exposure, but what parts of the exposure do we want to see? And so I like the mood. Okay, let me get the good stuff out of the way. I really like the mood. I like her stance. I like that there's like a face on her tattoo. I mean, on her arm, and then her face. Like, it's a very power pose. And I like that the trees have some motion in it, right? So there's a little bit of ambient, a little bit slower shutter to get the movement and the sunflowers behind, and then a light on her to kind of right bring her up. So I like all that, right? I think it's very cool. What I would just do two tweaks. One, a little bit of a radial darkening, a little dodging and burning, right on her, on right above her dress right here, because it's a little bit brighter than her face. So just toning that down just a little bit, and then bringing her face up. I mean, just a little bit, not a lot, but just balancing out that face exposure with her chest exposure, because like your eye tends to go there. The other place your eye goes is to the leftmost flowers. And so darkening kind of that left-hand side of the exposure, just a little bit of a gradient darkening, just a little bit, not a lot, but just enough so that the face is the first thing we see. Because my eye first goes to this flower, and then to like where her hair meets her dress, and then up to her face. And so just a little bit of exposure, like a radial exposure bump on her face, a little bit, bump down right here. And then just over her right shoulder, there's some bright flowers, and just darken that area just a touch. Again, it's subtle things, but I think it would really bring out, I think it would really make us see her power expression, because she's really holding the camera's gaze well. And so I think it would really emphasize that, because I think that's the most important part of this photo, right? Is to make you look at her eyes and be right. And the camera angle is accentuating that as well, right? The camera angle's below her, right? She's looking down at us. Literally, she's looking down at us. And so to really accentuate that, just some subtle dodging and burning, I think would really accentuate her gaze, and the power of her eyes and expression and her stance. All right, her hands aren't soft; they're fists, right? So all those things are like power, power, power. So I just want to see just a little bit of tweaks to make her face just that little bit brighter. Yeah, cool photo though. Cool mood. I think the mood is the best part. All right, this one's for our local rapper, Miss Ronnie D. This one's so close. It's so close. Just like that much, like a quarter of an inch difference. Now this one is also what kind of made me think of shadows, because there's not really bright white, and there's really not like dark in this one, right? There's not a black point or a white point. It's all kind of in the middle. And I think it works, right? It's this really cool spiral. We have a little bit of shadow, and we just have different zones of exposure, right? Different zones of shadows to midtones to highlights. But it's kind of in those three areas. There's really not a black, and there's really not a white. Okay, it's all kind of in that middle. But all this photo needs is for the camera to move like an eighth of an inch to the right. Just that far curve. I want to see it. Like just that, it bothers me. Just there's like a little, like that much of the curve you don't see. But otherwise, I really like the texture of this. I don't know what it is, fabric or tape, or I don't really know what it is. But I like that we can see all the texture and the little fibers, and the fact that it's not. My inclination would be to like drop my blacks all the way down, bring my whites all the way up. Right? I have a hard time with minimalism. I really do. I have a hard time with subtle. Surprise. And so I would really like to see just that little bit of that curve. And I think that would really complete the photo. Yeah, that's my really one criticism. I like that you went minimalist and stuck to a very narrow exposure histogram, because I don't know how to do that. I tend to go all the way, and it's not always to the best of me. So yeah, rolled torn copy paper, cool. Yeah, it's cool. I really like how you're just playing with like zones of light. So good job. All right, raise your hand if you know where this is. And this comes from all the way from Chris, who's in Maryland. Used to be in Austin, now in Maryland. She says, Josh, I want you to edit this one. I like your edits better than mine. Something like that in the email. So I did. She sent me the raw file. And I knew it was a Nikon file before I looked at the file info because I could see all the dust spots. I don't know what it is about Nikons, like the 850s and like the 750s. They show dust spots more than like any other camera system I've ever used. I don't know what it is. I don't know. But I could tell just by looking at the dust spots that it was a Nikon. Maybe I've looked at too many files in my life. Maybe so. But this is Snake River. Yeah, Pflugerville. Maybe if there's another Pflugerville that's not the one in Texas. Dragon lingo for the win. Anyway, so yeah, so there's an icon. So I did have to clone out a lot of dust spots when I edited it. There's also, I think, some like hairs or like something on them because there were some like strips of dust spots as well. But yeah, I've edited a lot of D810 files, and dust spots they just show up more on those files. I don't know why. But again, this is kind of what we're talking about as far as of shadows and highlights, right? Landscape photography, right? That's a lot of it, right? Dodging and burning those shadows and highlights. The other part of landscape is warm to cool tones, okay? So we kind of have shadows and highlights, and then warm to cool. Yeah, this is close to Ansel, yeah. And so this is Chris's edit. She sent me the raw file. I didn't edit. But let me tell you kind of what I see. I didn't look at her file until after I did my edit. One, damaged sensor, really? Wow. Ooh. Is that from those like horizontal lines that I saw? Okay. I think the blacks right at the lower third are a little over darkened. I think they're a little over blacked. And it kind of tells the viewer, don't look here. But with a landscape photo, we kind of want to meander through the photo, right? We kind of want to move around. The other thing I wanted to do when I saw this was make that amazing sunrise or sunset, I don't know which, kind of pop off. And then in the foreground, we kind of had this really cool orange foliage, yellow foliage. And I wanted to really make that pop, and I wanted to cool down the sky. And the other thing I wanted to do, if you look in the lower left, there's some like rocks or I don't know, there's some kind of like footpath or I don't know what exactly that is, but I cropped that out. So this is a 3x2 crop. I did a 16x10 crop, which is kind of cinematic, but more of like a laptop screen and not like an HD TV. So 16x10 was the ratio that I went with. And that just allowed me to get rid of that bottom little rocks because they were a little distracting, taking away from the foliage. All right, so there's mine. Quite different look to it. And I left more of the sky in. I added a big radial. One of my brushes I call Sunburst Grad. It's like plus 30 warmth, plus 30 highlights, 0.3 exposure. I think that's right. Something in there. But right in that center part, I wanted to bring out all of those yellows and golds. And then for the sky, I have a graduated filter called Ice Grad, and it's just -20 cool, right? So -20 on the blue, and then -20 highlights. And so I drug that down from the top to really accentuate the coolness of the sunrise. But then, if you notice on the right, there's a big tree. I didn't want that to take the instructions, so I used luminance masking, and I just said, and I bumped it up to not do the 20% on the bottom. So it was from like 20 to 100. So anything from 0 to 20, it didn't take that instruction. And then I also did that same sunburst. I really warmed up the foreground a whole bunch. I also bumped my shadows up a lot. I killed the highlights quite a bit, but I kept my whites high. I think a lot of times if you kill the whites too much, the photo kind of loses pop to it. And so I kept my whites up. But but just like brought down my highlights because that brings down the sky. And then I did some 3-way color wheel toning. Yeah, but if you notice in the bottom left, I did take out those 2 rocks you could see. And I just feel like this is a little bit more. I think with a lot of landscape, it's a lot of boosted shadow, boosted blacks, killed highlights. But I think the trick for me is keeping the whites high. I think that allows it to still have a pop and a vibrance to it. So if y'all want this, what I did to this file, I'll also send this one out in my next post, because I don't know, maybe you want to play with it or whatever, to kind of see what I did. But I'll share that one out as well. So yeah, Chris, I think by you saying wow, I hope you like that, because it really is a beautiful photo. Just these really cool blues and purples and pinks contrasted with the greens and oranges and yellows, right? So you have a lot of that working in the file. It was just a matter of kind of bringing it out a little bit. So yeah, I wish I was there. I was just in the mountains. I didn't really take any mountain photos because it was, I don't know, I'm a wuss. I was traveling. I didn't really have the energy or effort to go out and shoot, and it was like cold and snowy and nasty. So, and I didn't know where I was. So anyway, I really liked it. This one was fun to edit. It's fun to edit other people's photos because then I don't blame myself for every little thing that went wrong in it. So yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's it for today. Yeah. What do y'all think? Some good photos, right? But I hope it makes sense kind of what I was talking about in terms of like controlling shadows and getting your shadows to be where you want. And that's kind of the first thing I do, is mess with getting my shadows where I want them. And then I kind of build the rest of the exposure around there. So, you know, that from 50% to like 25% of the exposure, getting that right, and then letting everything else build around it. I used to do it around like the brightest 25%. But I felt then that sometimes it threw my blacks down too far or too high. So I think if you can learn to control your shadows with your lighting or your editing, I think the rest of the photos kind of build around that. If you want like a really cool example of all this, look up Dan Winter's work. And his photos are very dark and moody, but there's always detail in the shadows. You can always see into the shadows, but he controls it so well. So that'd be my biggest recommendation if you want like to see who I think is the best in the world at it. Take a look at Dan Winter's work. I'll type it in the comments there. But he does it, and he's really been my inspiration in terms of how to control contrast by controlling your shadows and your highlights. That's kind of that idea of like salt and pepper, right? If your dish only had salt, it doesn't really have balance, and if it only has pepper, it doesn't really have that balance. So being able to control those 2 dimensions is really going to give you a lot more control as a photographer. That's why I think that for lighting, I think if you can master using 2 lights, if you can get to the point where you understand how 2 lights work together, you can work with 20. The big hurdle is getting from 0 to 1, and then that refinement is from 1 to 2 lights. And once you get 2, you can do as many as you want, because you already understand kind of what they're doing, how that they can work independently of each other. And once you get that done, there's really not much of a learning curve to go from 2 to 10, 2 to 20, 2 to 30. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions today? We'll try to have a in-person one. Maybe not this month, but next month. Maybe May. I'm going to try to get vaccinated in the next week or so. So once we do that, maybe we can have a little happy hour, get together. So, yeah. Well, thanks for watching. This was episode 18. Holy moly, we've done 18 of these. Pretty amazing. Josh Says Mean Things. Thanks to all my patrons for submitting photos. Patreon.com/AzulLocks. We appreciate y'all's support. Patrons, we're doing a fitness for the top tier guys. We're doing a fitness shoot in April. And there's only 1 spot left for that tier. So if you're in the area and you want to come shoot with us, we're doing once a month shoots where we set stuff up. Let me know. I'll tell you how to get to it. And again, guys, just thanks for submitting. It's just good to kind of see y'all, even if it's through a computer screen right now. This was like the brightest part of my day, so I feel like a human again now that I can talk photos. So thank y'all for being out there. Thanks for listening. And yeah, we'll see you all in a couple weeks. All right. Peace. Peace out.